بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. Very happy and honored and pleased to have with us our special guest, my dear friend Sheikh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah, all the way from Manchester. Sheikh Abu Eesa isn't actually feeling too well today. May Allah Azza wa Jal cure him. So if he's got a slightly croaky voice or throat, it's not because he's been shouting at people. It's actually because he's not feeling too well. Although, the former is very likely also. But inshallah ta'ala, let's begin by welcoming our guest. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you, Sheikh?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shaykhna. And to everybody that's given salam, Ijlal, Hanifa, Suraya, Alia, Kauthar, Amira, everybody that's joining us this evening. Welcome to all of you. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let's kick off, inshallah ta'ala. Let me just tell you very quickly and briefly what we were trying to do with Go Memorize. I know I messaged you a while back about the program. One of the things that we wanted to do is to inspire people, motivate them to start memorizing the Quran. Many people have either had a very long gap since they last memorized the Quran, or maybe they didn't really try or get very far in the first place. So one of our goals was to give people an easy, inshallah ta'ala, method to memorize the Quran. And many of our students are actually from different parts of the world, but many of them are adults who, like there's that general thing that once you've reached a certain age and you've passed a certain age, you can't really memorize the Quran or it's very difficult for you. So actually, one of the things that we did, and last week we had Sheikh Walid, as you know, with us, is to show that actually even when you're older, you can still memorize the Quran. It may be a slightly different process. It may not be as easy, perhaps, as some young people when they memorize the Quran, but it's something which is possible. So I'd like to begin, Sheikh Abu Isa, with your journey and what you experienced in your own Quran hifth journey.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So you're going to have to really control me in that because that's such a massive question. And you're just going to need to, I know it's against your nature, but you're going to need to then interrupt to try to get a control of it because that's such a, as I said, wide and big question. And I can go in so many journeys with that. Um, but one thing I liked what you said. Well, first of all, let me say I love the program, love the idea, and I don't mind telling all these folks. I mean, I didn't even let you finish the sentence. I said just tell me time and place because this is something very dear and close to me. Not just as a person who's been there and done that, but obviously as a teacher. Um, Obviously as a fan of the Quran. I mean, some people like Quran, memorize Quran because of religious obligation they feel. Whereas I like it, I enjoy it. Like your recitation, mashallah, tabarakallah, I could sit there for hours listening to you. I like it. I enjoy it. It's not, some people like tone. Other people like they have, that doesn't necessarily make me more religious or anything. It's just that you sometimes have an affinity with it. So I'm invested in this project that you're doing. I also, my family as well, my children as well, which maybe we'll come to. So I love everything about it. Um, and what I appreciated you saying at the beginning about, that obviously the majority of, I mean, you're not going to find kids, a lot of kids in something like this, a project like this. And the majority will be adults. And you're then sometimes telling folks that listen, it's a program for adults, but you can do it. It's actually no problem at all. Look, use this example. Look at this guy. Look at that guy. But I'm glad that you said that. No, it is a lot easier when you're younger, and that honesty is important. That honesty and that kind of straightforwardness, because um, I think what's going to make my example and my anecdotes different to certainly Sheikh Walid's and other Qurra, because I'm certainly not a Qari, and other Hufad, is actually a sign of just how difficult it has been for me, or is. Maybe it wasn't so difficult when I was younger, a long time ago now, but now massively affected. Memory gaps all over the place, not just with Quran, but just generally. So that honesty is good. But I'm here to tell folks that absolutely, absolutely, there's not it's not just the fact that there's so many people that have done this and doing this all the time. And I guess I was one of them. But it doesn't matter if you don't get it done. You got to believe that you can get it done. I remember our teachers used to motivate us in the beginning. Never did they ever focus on getting it done. They were saying, but you've got to get started and make the intention that you're going to get it done. And every day then is like an act of ibadah for you. You know, it's just like you've got to be intelligent with your niyyah. Those people who make a real intention, they can put so much barakah in their lives, even if they don't even get close to it. Anyway, again, like I said, I can go all over the place. So as typical childhood, meaning a culturally religious household, my father, above and beyond just sending me to normal after school masjid, madrasa, um, but nothing more than that. But then when I got to the age of 10 and 11, he wanted me to go further. And so not only did I get the normal Surah Yasin and Surah Rahman done in the standard masjid setting, sitting there, nodding back and forth, repeating it 20, 30 times. Yani, I mentioned 20, 30 times repetition of an ayah to show that it was not a very serious kind of hifz. And but then I found it quite easy. I generally was good at school and reading and education and study, so I found that kind of useful in my memorization skills. Um, and then I learned Surah Al-Baqarah. So I actually memorized Al-Baqarah when I wasn't practicing, quote unquote. I was not practicing when I did it. 12 or 13, I probably was. And I was doing it just to keep my dad happy. I had no connection to it whatsoever. Um, so it was, um, and I think I had forgotten it largely by the time that I went to GCSEs and I did A levels, which is for your international folks is like the age of 17 and 18. And I wasn't practicing. I wasn't a practicing Muslim at that time. I took a year out, went to university, again, not practicing. So I must have been 19, I'm guessing, because I took a year out. So um, at the age of 19, or yeah, it must have been 19 or back end of 19, maybe I was early 20s, maybe. That was the 90s now we're talking about as an era. Um, a few things happened. I was inspired. I started to practice. And throughout my life, I've always been an all in or all out kind of guy. So when I was not practicing, I was hardcore not practicing. And then when I started to practice, I was like, there's nothing that I am going to leave unturned. The huge blessing, the very fortunate thing that Allah's favor upon me was that I had a teacher, meaning that I started practicing immediately with a person who had inspired me, as opposed to me going all over the place. And he was a Quran specialist and he used to teach yani Quran and the meanings of the Quran. And I was like, man, this is crazy that I don't know the Quran. And so something happened. Um, am I speaking too much? Because I am very conscious that I'm
No,
just
no, 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 I'll stop you when I think
make
you
sure you do, make sure you do, because I could go on for ages. Um, so what happened was you see, on one hand, I hope that this motivates people because I know that people will not be able to copy it. And I often tell the students this in logical progression, in the Al-Maghrib classes, in the Tarbiyah programs, that it is very important to sometimes be impressed and to be inspired by stories, but not to make the story more important, even though they sound so attractive, because they are mostly impossible to recreate. And people can sometimes get the wrong idea. And what I'm about to describe to you is just not possible for it to happen. It is so crazy what happened to me. So first of all, the most important factor is this was pre 9/11. Pre 9/11 means everything being pre 2001. International travel and confidence was sky high in the 90s. We could do whatever we wanted. We were so in control. We dressed like we want, presented like we wanted. In the early 90s and mid 90s, um, you see, I've never spoken about this subject actually. It's very interesting that, and I thought that I would love to be able one day to be able to speak to someone about this. That when I reflect upon the early 90s, the freedom, the freedom that we had, or the confidence that we had in our deen, was so on display in the public arena. I remember going into my university lecture I was studying pharmacy at the University of Manchester. And I used to walk in a thobe, and I used to walk in front of 500 people, and I would take the longest path, the most public in front of all of the people. I wanted everybody to see who I was. I was a confident character anyway, but I had transferred that confidence and that kind of ego, arrogant stroke thing into a proud presentation of Islam. And the dawah was so free to do that. Now, why am I mentioning this? I was a very popular person because of that very strong personality and character with the non-Muslims as well, with a lot of women as well. And the reason I mention women is because women are traditionally very, very good at taking notes in lessons. And so, even as a practicing Muslim, I had a lot of respect even from Muslim women and non Muslim women. And I quickly identified from them who was clever, who was intelligent. And we basically struck a deal, basically, where I said, if you don't mind, if you can write all the notes that you have in all of your lessons and pass them over to me. And these are not just notes, these are rewritten with underlined, red, and
Highlighted.
highlighted, the beautiful works of art, not the scribble bakwas that we would do. It was just gorgeous presentation, something that you found so easy to revise from. Once I had that kind of, and I was like a nice guy. I was, helping people out, and so it felt like there was a kind of a flow of favors and stuff. Once I realized I had this locked down, I didn't attend university. And so this is essential to what's ironically what happening with my sons at the moment, which I'll come back to as well. It meant that I presented myself at university for about the first 2 months developing these relationships. And then for the next 3 years of my bachelor's degree, I probably attended maybe 3 or 4 weeks of actual lectures. And the rest of the time, I was studying full time Arabic, Hadith, and Quran, and this and that, whatever, whilst getting a professional degree. And the degree was very easy as well, hardly worth the paper it was written on. Pharmacy is such an easy degree, right? Especially if you've got any kind of intelligence. And
This
that
is all
put me in.
Manchester.
This is in the University of Manchester, and this afforded me an opportunity in my time. And so obviously, you have many students who don't attend lectures. So many, actually, it's a standard student life, but you don't normally expect to get away with that in a professional degree like medicine, pharmacy, or whatever. But I had a good structure. They were supporting me there. The note takers. And I was very disciplined. My teacher was very clear, and I would go to his house every day and to his public lessons in the masajid. And I had other teachers as well. But the unique thing that was unique to me is that I had moved out of my mixed accommodation, mixed gender, very kind of, middle class type, people who were in there were paying in those days £100 a week. I had taken a year out. As you remember, back in the day, we used to get grants as well. And so it was free money. Education was free as well. And I had savings as well. I was rich at university, right? I didn't take a single penny from my parents. I used to buy them kind of stuff. I used to be working part-time as well. So money was flowing. And so I had taken an accommodation, a university accommodation that was like the most brand new, and had men, women, and every night was party night. And that was like at the very beginning. After I realized I started practicing, after a couple of months, I realized I had to go. And one thing led to another, and I actually got kicked out basically. And I moved into a masjid. And this masjid, it was a old house, still there actually, Masjid Zakaria in Wali Range. Its loft was a 2 room and a kitchen and a bathroom conversion. It was one of the big lofts. And the Imam used to live there. And I used to pray there. And the Imam moved out. And I used to pray all my prayers there. Because I didn't go to university.
Yeah.
And when I got told first of all, and so I asked the trustees to let me rent the place, and they gave it to me for next to nothing. So I used to live in the masjid. So I want you to understand that this was the game changer for my hifz. The Sheikh Abdul Rahman Alibi, his name was, he was a master of Quran and Qira'ah. And of course, again, I need to tell you about context. Manchester was rammed full of the Mujahideen that had come back from Afghanistan. They had all sought asylum. So all of the Libyans and the Algerians and the Moroccans had come back, and Manchester was packed full of knowledge and activity and scholars. Abu Qatada in those days, when he was calm, he was teaching, of course, famous, and he was obviously a very high level scholar and and the like. And Sheikh Abdul Rahman used to teach Arabic and Quran in my masjid after Fajr. I used to attend that. He used to review, and I would spend the whole of the 5, 6 hours until Dhuhr memorizing Quran. And um, the difference, I think, with me is even though I didn't have that first 20 years of Quranic kind of practice, and even my tha was a sa, and my za was a whatever, it very, very quickly got sorted in the first 1, 2 months because these guys did not speak English. And so when I was studying Arabic, I was studying Arabic by accent, by, I don't know what the word is, by not a formal teaching of Arabic. I was learning Arabic like a Pak does when he goes to the Arab lands to work. Sida, sida, yani this, that kind of way. I was not learning it from its qawaid. And so what was happening is I was organically developing an Arabic culture and an Arabic tongue, where now many people mistake me for an Arab because when I speak Arabic, even though it might not be the most grammatically correct or the most perfect, but my lahja is obviously of the same because that's what I grew up with. That's what I learned as. Now that helped me to not waste too much time in having to re-go over the principles of tajweed and ahkam and tilawa and makharij and so on when it came to memorizing the Quran. And I did it in a year. And I completed it in a year. Um, my uh, entirely by myself, entirely self-driven, but also in a very weird way. The masjid would close. It was a Deobandi masjid, Tablighi masjid, actually. The masjid would close at sunrise, but I'm the caretaker of the masjid. And so I would lock the door after everybody has gone. And I now have the musalla to myself. And I would make tawaf of this musalla. I don't like sitting down. I'm not good at sitting down. And I enjoy walking and standing. And that's like you might have seen Al Maghrib classes. I walk all the time as I'm teaching. And that comes from these days of studying. I would walk around. I would probably do maybe 1,000 circuits every morning, walking and just reading. I'd walk around Mus'haf and I would do approximately 30 to 40 repetitions. The normal method would be ayah, and then ayah 30, 40, ayah second 30, 40, join then 20, and then the third ayah 30, 40, third one, fourth one 30, 40, join 20, and then the whole four 20. And this is how it was. I knew that I needed to do it 50 times, 60 times to take it to long-term memory. I made a conscious decision that I was not going to go into Quran. And what I mean by that is that my passion was hadith and fiqh. And this is very important for everybody to hear. And it's important for me to be honest here that I made a conscious decision to short-term memory the Quran in order to maximize the amount of time that I could have to give to hadith and fiqh because I knew I was starting 10 years too late. I'd already lost 10, 15 years too many. And I knew that I had to catch up and I couldn't catch up. And so I saw Quran as a functional tool, as opposed to I have no desire ever to lead the prayer or to record recitation or to go on social media and show that kind of thing, which is a strong driver these days, right? For me, it was I need to be able to know what I'm referring to when I'm studying and teaching hadith and fiqh. And that was my passion. And so I knew it would, just like we all know, what comes quickly goes quickly. And it came very quickly and it went quickly. And that essentially is actually what happened in the, I want to say, the first, I want to say pass. Yeah, let's call it a pass. The first pass of the memorization of my Quran. Then it happened again later, but I'll give you a chance here. I need to butt in.
Well, I was just going to ask because I think that, I mean, Jazakallah khair, that's a very unique situation. Like when you said no one's going to be able to recreate that, I think literally no one's going to be able to recreate that. Or there's very few people that would be in those set of circumstances and memorizing the Quran. Just like, subhanAllah, many different factors come together for you and it seems to work for you. But I was going to ask you, like, during that period, because a year is a long time, right? So usually what happens with students, and it's very common that you have that initial drive and passion, and then after a month or two you find that there's, like in Ramadan, like midway through Ramadan, people just start slacking off. The masjid start getting a bit emptier, and people just start getting a bit more tired and fatigued. To keep up that motivation for a year is actually quite difficult, even if you are relatively self-motivated. So what were the challenges that you faced? How did you overcome that? Because I think motivation is a big thing when it comes as an adult trying to memorize the Quran.
I had so many motivations. It was so easy for me to do. I was so blessed, subhanallah. Yani, I used to love being alone, and so that helped. Being in a masjid, being in a musalla, um, empty musalla, where nobody else is there, and you know that you're in a divine place and you're able to walk around. I used to love it so much. I used to love reciting in it so much. My father has a masjid in Pakistan. My favorite thing when I go to Pakistan is to walk into the masjid when it's empty and walk around like I own it. Nobody's there and reciting, because I don't have the best recitation, but everybody loves a recitation of their own in an echoey masjid, right? Everyone thinks yani, that they're, mashallah,
And the
Dr. Rashid
microphone.
Ali Sufi. No, without the microphone. Microphone is disaster. Microphone is a disaster, but yani, when you've got an echoey masjid and it's all empty, I even remember used to doing that as a kid in the local Brillo Masjid, yani 10 out, 10 out, Albert Road Masjid, it was called, in Ilford, people will know it. Big hall, and I used to, as a kid, walk around and Ayatul Kursi, whatever I used to know, I used to just the sound of the boom, the echo, whatever. And I have a music background, so echo and tone and bass was something I was really interested in. I used to love the deep intonation. I used to love deep recitation. I didn't like high tonation. I don't like sing-song reciters. They really get on my nerves. I like folks who have a very kind of, like this, but like yourself, you got a very deep voice. Badr Turki, I love, right? Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar, as you know, that I put him in this masjid, very deep. And like, I like that. So that deep echo was something that I used to enjoy. So in that masjid, the way that it was structured, high ceilings and the like, I used to love being masjid. That was its own motivation. Secondly, I was ridiculously practicing. Like you cannot, but you can, of course, you can, but maybe people cannot. You don't be putting yourself in my category. This was not a person on an iman buzz during Ramadan. I was, like I said, I'm all in or all out. I absolutely knew that Islam was the truth. And I absolutely knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create insan for mediocrity. And I absolutely was aware that He had given me many, many talents and benefits over the rest of the people, and that I would be questioned about it. Like I was acutely aware of a massive burden and responsibility that you can't do a half job on this deen, that people will definitely be looking at you and relying on you. I had mapped out my future. Within a couple of months, I could see who I needed to get married to, what I needed to get done by this age, what I needed to make sure that the exams when I do this, how I'm going to qualify, where I'm going to go and study, how much I needed to earn. I was so disciplined, and I often tell people that when you look at the ones that you love so much and you're inspired by so much, the general Muslims, and they look to a Yasir Qadi or a Fulan or an X or Y. The only difference between you and that guy is discipline. That's it. That's the, the only difference. They're nothing better than you in most things, right? Except discipline. And those that know that they were created for something more, if they harness that discipline, they go to do whatever they wanted. And so I was motivated self massively. The other thing is that I had an unbelievable group of people around me. In university, the fact that it was off campus, I was from London and away from home, um, that brings that vibe, living away with practicing Muslims. And even though I lived with myself, I would spend the rest of the afternoon and evening with them in lessons and stuff. And these folks were, some of them were Arabs, some of them were practicing way before. So there was a challenge to keep up with them. And that was a motivation. And there's another really important factor. This masjid, which is still there now, Masjid Zakaria, is in where? Wali Range. And Wali Range is near a place called Moss Side, which you probably might have heard of. Moss Side was a huge crime-ridden kind of place in the 90s. It was mostly full of Afro-Caribbean, Jamaican type, lots of criminals, gangs, this, that, whatever. And in the 90s, as I said, when the asylum kind of thing opened up and the people came in, that was really the cheapest place for them to move into. And the Somali generation started to move in. So I grew up with the first group of Somalis that came to the UK. And because I mean, obviously, the big population, the last big population of Muslims have been the Afghans, and before them, the Kurds, and before them, small ones which are not significant. And before them were the Somalis. We often forget now that Somalis have now been here 2 generations and now they've developed their middle class. But when there was no middle class for Somalis and they were right straight asylum seekers like we see Afghans and Kurds now, they were in their raw element, very deen, very cultural, very whatever. And I used to have a memorization buddy. And we used to do the kind of stuff that you see on TikTok and YouTube these days, when one person recites an ayah and the other one recites the ayah. But we just weren't recording each other, right? We'd been sitting there kind of, I would finish off his ayah, he finishes. I used to love that, it was beautiful fun. And,
It was
you know, the,
memorizing. It memorized.
yeah, no, memorized. Yeah, so we're doing a surah. I would recite, but this is in recitation now. This is tilaw. So
Yeah,
this is after we've done some memorization, and then he would recite one ayah, I recite the next. And the aim is to increase the tone and then me to match the tone, then him to bring the tone down. So it's like an orchestra, like a performance. So there used to be a bit of fun in that as well. So multiple factors that kept me motivated. Again, I struggle to think because you said that, yeah, you're right. Nobody can emulate that. I haven't even got to the second pass. When we get to the second pass, meaning obviously after a year, it damped down and I knew that I needed to revive it again. So I had to do something, but you want to come to that.
yeah. Well, okay, so I was going to ask you about your teacher. So you mentioned that you had a Libyan sheikh that was I suppose, your motivation. He's the one that kind of inspired you. But I wonder if through that year you were constantly reading to him. So was he someone that was testing your memorization, or was it a case of you were just self-testing the whole period, like pretty much?
100%. I did not do this the right way. He was not testing me at all. Okay. I would try to recite to him. He was a very busy guy. He was not never doing a formal Quran his program. And he wasn't listening to students, but rather he was like Sheikh Abdul Rashid Ali Sufi is right now. So if you look at Sheikh Abdul Rashid right now in Qatar, he also doesn't, I mean, as far as I know, I have a very good relationship with him, Hafizahullah, but he's too big and he shouldn't be actually sitting there doing students. You know what I mean? His students should be doing students.
Yeah,
And, but as you know very well, he is absolutely fanatical, obsessed with the Quran, right? Like people just don't understand that he right now in Qatar is praying all night. And Uthman, right, the chief, my right hand man in all the Hajj programs and everything, he's in Doha right now. He's just said that, yeah. So he finished Tarawih and then said, everyone, I'll see you guys at 12:30. Yeah. So 1 hour later. And he prays from 12:30 until Fajr. So he's praying basically 90% of the night.
yeah. I
And
had to
he's
finish
always,
the Quran like 4 or 5 times in Ramadan or something.
oh, bro, he done the 2 khatams already.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So, we're not even a third through or whatever. 2 khatams done already. Chief said that in the first 2 rak'ah, he did Baqarah and Ali Imran 2 nights ago. Yani madness. Okay. And, but so the point I want to make is that when you're a student of his, you're behind him. Like Jamal Abdel Nasser. He's an ayah min ayatillah. He's so fantastic as a reciter. The one in London, you know what I'm talking about, yeah?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And yeah, I can tell you that if you were to ask him, did he sit down with the Sheikh Abdul Rashid and get formally taught? No, it's that he's done that himself separately, and then spending so much time in the khidmah of Sheikh Abdul Rashid and hearing the recitation so much that in itself is a way of motivation and muraja'a and so on and so forth. And so similarly, Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Libi, when he was fit and whatever, he actually moved to Birmingham, by the way. I don't know where he is right now. It's been a long time. Um, he would be praying all night as well, a lot. He used to love Qiyam and Ramadan as well. And I used to attend 4 hour, 5 hour Qiyams with him, obviously young, fit. I could able to kind of do that. And so I would do a lot of muraja'a behind him, listening to him, but actually formally sit down like you're meant to, that didn't used to happen. That only happened a bit later in a second kind of part. But it was mostly self-testing and then amongst friends, amongst the people. They were qualified, don't get me wrong. They were checking if I've got any mistakes or whatever. But then, as I said to you, I wasn't so much concerned about this becoming the most concrete thing in my mind as well. And I do believe there is an argument out there, a weak one, but an argument that sometimes you don't need to become the most mutqin person that knows every single, work backwards and this, that, whatever. And you know how they do in the Quran. I cringe when I'm watching the Quran exhibitions, what they do to these kids and stuff. It's almost like it's become more entertainment, yani, than like what
Yeah.
actually is the function, yani,
I
of
mean, I think
asking a person.
that's a very good point, Shahab, you said, because I think with our students also, like one of the questions that we often get is what's acceptable as a level of memorization, right? So how strong does your hip have to be? How many mistakes can you have? And one of the things that I say to students is like, if it was a young person, for example, if it was like my child or someone, like I would have a different standard for them because I think they can reach that level. But when you start memorizing later, I think that if someone has the Quran, and like you said, it's ibadah, it's a lifelong journey. You keep working at it, you keep going over it over and over again. I think that you don't have to be so hard upon yourself because we have, as you know, narrations of even companions like forgetting verses and the narration of Ibn Mas'ud forgetting, like making mistakes in some of the small surahs of the Quran, and so that's just a lifelong thing. It's just a human trait. So that's definitely an issue that people have in terms of this perfectionist attitude that people, because it's the Quran, people feel that they have to do it in a perfect way. If they don't, they're sinning, or it's a problem, or they haven't achieved that. And I think some of that, I feel sometimes is from shaitan, and some of that is probably just because Muslims, obviously, in their deen, want to have that level of excellence, especially when it comes to the Quran. But I think that's a very valid point. So
Well,
it's very
but would you have the confidence to actually, I mean, what you just said, I think is pretty, yani, neither here nor there. I think we can all agree on that. The question is that would you actively tell someone you don't need to actually do it that well?
yeah. I have told
You see how difficult it is to make this.
yeah, yeah,
It's another level up to say, because I'll tell you why. Because when I was doing it with my kids, and I was like what you said, when you're a kid, there's no excuse. And I'm not, my way of parenting, and there's no excuses, yani. And it was actually Abdul Ghaffar who stopped me. And the Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar, he says, nah, man. He goes, this is wrong. He goes, let them go quicker. Don't worry, man. Don't worry. And stop. His manhaj was the opposite of how we were brought up, especially the second time I did it, which is that you don't go forward until you've done muraja of the old and this kind of madness, which basically then takes you 5 years to do the hifz, right? And subhanAllah, he opened my eyes. Ironically, even though I've been to more places than probably he has when it comes to memorization, right? He opened my eyes to the idea that uh, just get their mind over it. And get them feeling for it. And they don't need to remember anything. But
yeah,
when it comes to the moment that it's needed, they'll just need half an hour with a juz and it's back.
yeah,
And I'm glad he told me that early, because even though the irony is that I basically did what he did or what he was saying without knowing that out of jahl. But then when it came to my kids, I actively did that.
yeah,
And my elder two, who are the two hufaz in the house that are mutqin, yani mashallah, they were brought up upon this principle, Isa and Yahya. And I see it, yani, that they just need half an hour with the juz, and then they can lead the salah, without any problem. And I think this is the way, I don't want to say this is the way forward, astaghfirullah, because like you said, we need to be holding kids to a higher level. But from an adult point of view, I do think that it's okay now for us to say, you can do it like this, which would be if you try to do that in a cultural setting or in the classical centers, you get shot in the head, yani, for that, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
maybe
I agree with Sheikh Abdul Ghafar's methodology. Like I've used that with a couple of my own children as well. That kind of same methodology. I just caveat that with, that they're going to spend the rest of their life doing muraja. There's nothing left. Like once you've finished the rest of your
that's the
life,
key.
yeah, just revision. So as long as that caveat's there, that they're going to inshallah keep that up either through the parents, giving them that motivation, and then inshallah give them getting to that level where they will self-motivate. Then I think it's okay. I think the problem is when they don't do anything after that. So they'll do it very quickly and they'll forget it, like you said. But I want to move on to your second stage now because obviously, like we don't want to spend all night here. I
So
think we're all
it was just that I realized that after 2 years or three, after some years, that this wasn't as good as that it could have been. And so I went a couple of times to West Africa, to Morocco, to Mauritania, and so on, to try to study. I met Sheikh Khaddado, and he told me to go and gave me like a tazkiyah to go and see his uncle, Sheikh Muhammad Salim al-Ladud alayhi rahmatullah. And um, what he introduced me to, I got very, very sick out there. I had to leave. But with the time that I was there, what he introduced me to was the importance of writing it down, something that I had never, ever done. And and never was it acceptable to do anything less than 50 times. And so on the lawh, we would have to write out each ayah 50 times and then rub it out. And then the next ayah 50 times. And there were two things that he told me, which I never implemented, but I'm telling you because people should learn from my mistakes as well. That 50 is solid, 100 will never be forgotten. That's what they say. That's what our teachers used to say. That 50 is solid, 100 will never be forgotten. Something that you repeat 100 times each verse, and then in combination with the next one, and then in a combination of the four, like we spoke about, it will not be forgotten. The second thing I learned in that second pass, which like I said, I didn't do. And because actually I didn't go with the intention of doing the Quran again. But when I was there, Mauritanians are not interested in ignoring the Quran. It's got to be a part of fundamental part of your syllabus. I was there for the Arabic. Um, but then they said that you should write out the Quran uh, in your lifetime, in your study. And they said that the 6 times written and it will never be forgotten. And I mean, I never did it, but it always stuck with me. And when my kids were young, I implemented upon them. And so all of them have taqriban a mushaf done in their notebooks, in basic notebooks. But this was before the time now that these new ones are out. You've seen the ones, the leather bound ones, yeah?
yeah.
Um, um, and so I recently, not recently, a couple of years ago, I went and bought quite a few. And my wife is big on that. She likes writing hers out as well. She's also a late learner. And she's, I think, completed her hifz in that as well. Uh, uh, the I just think that that is a really useful tip for your students because you've got different versions. Some which has got obviously a very faint trace, which is kind of cheating, kind of thing. But there's a benefit for it. But
Yeah.
those that have got the ayah on lock and can copy it, I am telling you now, all students who are listening, that there's a difference between copying and tracing. There's a effort, there's a barakah, there's a conscious intelligence. Yeah, and what I'm trying to say is that it's like when you rewrite your notes. When you at university, like the girls used to do, they used to go and rewrite the notes. The rewriting of the notes is the best revision. Yeah. And likewise, if you're tracing, your mind can switch off because you're just tracing. But when you have to concentrate so much to copy, then you're reading as well. And so that's another thing that I'd throw out that I think is really useful for people.
It's very interesting what you mentioned about the repetitions and the 100 times. So the method that we gave to our students in Co Memorize is that they have to do 20 repetitions by looking each day of the week, 5 days a week. So that's 100 repetitions, and then they memorize on the weekend. And so we're trying to introduce people to a method which is a play on that method of the repetitions, but just one that isn't so much pressure. So that there's not pressure to memorize every day. You get that space. So even, for example, if one day you just did 10 because you're busy, well, you make that up the next day, and you try to space it out also ideally between the morning and the evening of each day. So it's 10 in the morning, 10 in the evening, or four after every five salahs, and so on. So something like that, so that you can come to memorize. Because I think that's very true. Like this whole thing of repetition, I think people don't understand how hifz, much of it is repetition. It is. There's no secret. There's no shortcut. There's no special, like, unless you have photographic memory or something. It's literally just repetition after repetition after repetition. And the more the more senses you can use, or the more different skills you can use, like the writing, which is why the West Africans always have their Quran, mashallah, locked down. Like the Mauritanians, the Moroccans are known for this because they still have that old method of the lawh, which unfortunately in most Muslim countries now, other than I think in that part of Africa, isn't really common anymore. Um, Let me ask you then about your children, because I know, mashallah, you went through, like you mentioned, you this same journey with your children. That's, I think, also like something which, for many of our students, they either they're trying to memorize alongside their children, or some of them in the program for their children maybe. That shift between you being the one memorizing the Quran, and now you having to do it with your children. Like, I've been through this journey, you've been through this journey. It's very different. Like, you learning yourself with that same motivation, then trying to get a 6, 7, 8 year old who doesn't really understand that, trying to get them to memorize the Quran, especially when the going gets tough, and especially after the first number of easy surahs and so on, that they get used to. What was your experience with that, and what would you advise others?
Obviously, we don't have time for that. The details of that, people will know, many people of your students will know that I cover this in Protect This House, the whole kind of methodologies and pros and cons of different ways of doing it. And to touch on your previous point about the different Muslim centers, the mahdaras and the madrasas and whatever, they're all based upon repetition, but they all have a little variation in their methods. And that importance, that point is important when we are now doing it ourselves, all the people who are starting off, as well as doing it for kids, that don't get too sucked into one person's method. Whatever works is what works. And don't get too sucked into, idolizing a particular way, like mine, for example, because you just won't be able to pull it off from a financial point of view, for example, or from a political point of view, for example. You know, going to Mauritania for me was easy because it was pre 9/11. We could do what we wanted. I remember going just after 9/11. I wasn't allowed in. I got arrested. I got thingy. I was held on the border in a prison. It was a nightmare. It was a situation. The American consulate embassy were on the case of every single person. I'm America. What have I got to do with America? And the UK government, the UK embassy put a complaint in that why is the American embassy getting, and the politics was mad after 2000 and whatever, and it still hasn't recovered. It's not easy to go to these places, um, not easy at all, and it is important that people don't take this too seriously, you know, because the standard boring part I can tell you, which is that I was obviously highly a vision. I had a very clear vision for my kids. All of them had to be before. I needed them to be done very, very early because I knew that how important school would be and how much time it takes. So I've got to get it done whilst young. And so we always started. I made it very, very clear to my wife that I'm not the guy that's got the patience to do the fatha and then ta fatha ba and then sa fatha ba. I'll hear that two times and I'll die, right? Whereas you need to be a woman's patience and mercy to be able to hear that mistake that many times and carry on repeating and getting the kid. What I said, here's the situation. You get the bulk of the work done, I'll do the finishing. And that was our deal.
I get the glory, yeah.
And all the glory, all the glory. Got the Fatiha in myself, as you know, that's where the ajr is. And then leave all the rest of the Mus'haf for her. And, you know,
And then
the
Surah Nas.
Muraja.
Mention Surah
That's
Nas.
so, so the finishing would be that My job is to develop the background behind the Quran, to develop the knowledge behind the Quran, to develop the depth in the Quran and the tone and recitation. Your job is to get the bulk of the work done. That was like, a clear kind of your skill is in that, my skill is in this. And so, for example, I would take my kids to every single prayer. Fajr was never missed from 7, 8, 9, every single day, every single morning, every single Isha, very, very important because I wanted them to listen to the Imam. I'd be testing them on what's been said. I'd be getting them to be reciting and the like. So that's what I mean by the finishing. I mean the polishing. I mean by that, right? So I do the polishing, you do the tough stuff, and I can speak to that easily. My patients can deal with that. My patients can't deal with kids. I've never been good with kids, so that was one thing. I think that's pretty standard. I think many people have that kind of setup at home, and obviously I was busy as well. Um, but the difference is that again, my financial circumstances, which were always good because I worked very hard, did a lot of contracting, and I was able to afford to move to Egypt while still working back and forth, which was not very common to be able to do in the early kind of years. Most people, you can't leave your job, which I could, and I could come back and contract. And what this allowed me to do is to put my children into an Arabic environment where they had Quran teachers as well. So that again helped them as well. And then another thing which was very unique, which was a very interesting project, which started, it never used to exist, but it started in the early 2000s, which was this Quran camp where the Quran is memorized in a month.
Yeah, intensives.
Yeah, this kind of different level intensive, torture level intensive, actually, right? And most kids in their crack, it's the house that they go to. I mean, I don't mind telling folks, and you're going to be shocked by this, but you're not allowed to know where the place is. Parents were not allowed to. They would take the kids in the nighttime so that they couldn't get followed because parents would do that, right? And I've always said, I mean, I've said this in lectures on Protect This House, that the biggest problem in your kid's journey to study and knowledge and X, Y, and Z will not be the kid, it will be you. You are the weak link. The
Yeah.
parents are the weak link. They're the ones who break first. They're the ones who don't have the ability to motivate. Like the husband does not have the ability to look after the wife who's doing the majority of the work. I always say that you have got to service the service provider. And if the service provider, who is the wife that's spending all this time running the house and then teaching the Quran, and you're just sitting there, if you don't, deal with her and keep her motivated, right? It's not the kids because kids are so easily motivated. You promise them sweets, chocolates, PS5s, this, that, whatever. You can do all of that. And, they'll do it. But an adult, they don't feel appreciation, don't feel the love, don't feel whatever. And so all of this kind of stuff was important. Their weakness is a problem. And I saw firsthand. I mean, I went through it myself. I mean, I was a bit of a nutter. I couldn't care less. But my wife was like, I need to know where they are. I need to know what they're eating. And this was Quran boot camp to a different level. They would start at Tahajjud time all day and then go to sleep straight after Isha. The whole day is just memorizing. And I never forget to get in, you had to pass a test, an entry test. The entry test is that I can't remember the ages of what Eesa and Yahya were, but they were like 7 and 9 or something like that. Yeah. And the page would open, the Quran would be like, all right, here you go. This random page. You've got 10 minutes to memorize it.
Wow.
Yeah. 10 minutes to memorize it. And I was like, the heck, even I couldn't do that. Right. And I sat there like bamboozled, and these boys just went at it. And then the guy would then say, okay, and then he'd take the page and he would say, read from here, read from there. Boys smashed it. Yeah. But what do you expect? Anyone would smash it because you're just the short term short. I remember it was the second page of Araf on the taxi on the way home. I said, listen, boys, from here to there, they had forgotten already. 1 hour later, 1 hour later. Yeah, what comes in an hour is gone in an hour. It was gone. But they just wanted to know that there's the ability
That's
to take on large amount of exact capacity and speed, then they would do. So they went there. Youngest basically couldn't handle it for a week. He cried so much, and so he had to pull out. Eldest, hang on, and he completed the whole month. And you can see the difference between the eldest and the second in that kind of quality. Again, is that the be all end all? No, it's just another part, another component in a journey, like you said, that comes with a caveat that the rest of the life there's going to be muraja, that there's going to be, and it's just a useful thing. And I'll say one more thing. I'll say one more thing. There's a very close friend of mine. I don't think you know him, but you did meet him when you went and taught in Calgary. His name was Ayub. Do you remember Ayub?
yeah. I think I remember you. Yeah.
Okay, so Ayub, he's in now in Medina. He works in Medina. And he's like an I mean Ayatollah prodigy. He is that guy who has a photographic memory and so on. But he has developed using this Anki, this software, which people use for revision. And he's been able to use that, and he's done a video on that. And I will share it to you so you can share it with your students. Um, a way to be able to actually identify in you using AI, obviously, and Anki, what it is that you're weak in, and then give you the algorithm to basically focus on those verses as opposed to the ones that you know already, which is crazy. This just goes to show that how much the game has changed from writing on upon a lawh to then on a phone with Anki. And I'm telling you, it is astonishing the results that he's getting with that. But again, the core generic component, there has to be discipline and ready to put the time in. There's no shortcut around that. Shortcuts around the methods and not being having to be in a third world country, no electricity, having to drink mud water, getting sick with yellow fever and cholera and dying like I did, versus yani sitting there with a phone or a device. You know, you can change the environment, but you can't change the hard work, bro.
Yeah, it's Panama. It's very true. We have some questions from our brothers and sisters as well. But I just want to ask you one final thing. Ask Sheikh Walid something very similar, and maybe with you it'll be slightly different. But I wanted to say, like, if you could go back now, or if you could speak to your 20-year-old self, or 19, I think you said at that time, what would you? I know, like, yours was a very unique situation, and so maybe for that reason you wouldn't change much of it. But I'm sure there's certain things that you would have now, like in hindsight, you would have said, well, okay, maybe I could have changed that or done that better, or maybe had something that was missing that, had I had it, it would have helped me greatly, at least in terms of the retention or something else. Is there anything that you would say that you think you would possibly change or advise others with?
You know, subhanAllah, when I look at where I am right now, without getting into the whole dodgy kind of aqidah of the whole thing, yes, but I could never ever imagine any single aspect of my life ever wanting to be changed. I know that's not the question you're asking technically, but I genuinely believe that every decision that I made had such a significant impact for right or wrong reasons that turned me and the people around me and everything into what I always realized could happen and has happened, and I think will get better. And so, no, I will say there's not a single thing I change. But are there things I just wish and I cry and I wish that I had been able to do, which I do believe, and I don't think it's semantic, I do think is different to what I could change, right? I just wish that I could recite without any hesitation, that my itqan and that my memorization had been 100 times as opposed to the 20, because I knew what I was doing. But I intentionally did that. And I knew that if I had changed 20 to 100, it would be permanent. And then I could do an Abdul Rashid Ali Sufi. And I could do a Badr al Turki. And I could do a you. I could do an Abdul Ghaffar. That would be the one thing that I wish that I had done, which I do think is different to change. And so if we're speaking to people now that want to take a lesson, that this is what he's saying, I want to say to you that, subhanAllah, there will come times, there will be moments in your life where you just want to walk around and be able to just recite Quran. Just just recite. And that's something that I cannot do for more than a couple of pages. in random places. I have to stop. There'll be a mistake. I have to pull out Musaf, check with the phone, this, that. Whenever I'm in a salah and the imam makes a mistake, I always hear the mistake and then say, no, he was probably right. And then I check in the phone and I realize that I was right. But I will never, ever challenge an imam because I know I have no question to because my hifz is so weak. So that's what I wish that I had. There are some times where I'm alone in a nice area, which is, and all of us will have this area, and I travel a lot as well. So I'm in areas where you're alone and it's wide and echoey. And when you start reciting, there's not a feeling like it in the world. And I wish that I could recite for pages. That's one thing I would say. So I would say that, listen, I know it's more difficult now. The distractions are so much more than it used to be. We were blessed by no mobile phones. We were blessed, yeah, and with not so much electricity being available. So it's easier for us to focus. Now it's so much more difficult with billah, man. It's so difficult.
Yeah.
But if you can have the discipline, then please increase in your repetitions. It's the only thing that I'd say.
It's very interesting because Sheikh Walid said something very similar. Sheikh Walid's thing also was that he wished that he spent a bit more time focusing. I think Sheikh Walid also kind of rushed his process of normalization. I would, for those of you that didn't watch that interview with the Sheikh last week, it's still on the YouTube channel. I think it's a very good watch. But his was very similar that he regrets that he didn't actually give it that extra care and attention at that time because now it would benefit him. Like it would just be easier now rather than having to like every time that he wants to, for example, lead Taraweeh or something, he says that it takes him more time and effort. So it's very interesting that you both kind of had very different journeys, but that is one takeaway that I think is very similar from your journeys also. Okay, let me just ask you a couple of questions, inshallah. I don't want to keep you too long, so let's ask for a few questions from our brothers and sisters, and then inshallah we'll call it an evening. The first question was someone was asking, so the Surah Baqarah, the stuff that you did memorize as a child, when your father was bringing you into that madrasa system and you were learning those surahs, you said you finished Al-Baqarah. Is that something the sister's asking, Khadija's asking, is that something that stayed with you afterwards then? Because you
It's
memorized it
such
at
a
an
good
early age?
question. Such a good question, actually. More deeper than she might even realize. Because I remember memorizing it and thinking to myself, I have to do this again because I learned it as a Brillo, right? I learned it as a Maza Haza Waza, yeah. And I thought to myself, you can't do that. You can't go ahead with that. And I remember that about Yasin. I remember that I was thinking to myself, a conscious decision when it came to memorize Yasin. Have I got enough time to waste Yani memorizing Yasin when I memorized it already? No, I've got to, because you learned it like a paki and you've got to do it again. And I remember that I didn't. And I had no problem. These are the two surahs that are absolute. Yani subhanallah, imagine that I did the whole Quran properly with multiple recitations, right? And repetitions, beg your pardon. Multiple repetitions. And all of that is weaker than my Yasin and my Baqarah, which I didn't hardly touch. Bro, whatever is, as the Arabs say, whatever in the young ages is just carving in stone, man. It is, as opposed to the amount of painting that I did on the water when I in my 20s and 30s.
I think
So
that's a
yeah,
very good
it
point, right?
stayed.
We want to like also remind people like everyone's on their own journey, but most of us that have kids and especially young kids, like the amount of time and effort that we should put into that, sometimes we don't give it that due attention and importance until I say to people often ask me one of the most common questions is what age shall I start with my children? I say to them as soon as they can start speaking, as soon as they can start speaking, you start with the Quran rather than this thing of waiting, oh, 8, 9, 10, 11, then they're going to understand it and appreciate it. I've always found that's like a false narrative. It's a very common mistake I think that people make. I'm a firm believer. As soon as they can start speaking, they can start copying, and even if you're just sounding out words and they're copying like how kids pick up language, you start with the Quran. So yeah,
Not
so
not 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 not, not just a mistake, Sheikh Hassan. The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Sheikh Kahlan wrote an article on this the other day, last week actually. That soon as the child starts speaking is when they need to memorize Quran and Tawheed and Adhkar and Hadith. Soon as they start speaking, and that's so many narrations, yani, from the Sahaba doing that. And we, unfortunately, in the liberalization of society, especially the liberalization of education, where everybody is absolutely enamored and obsessed with Montessori and Scandinavian models of schooling and education and about letting the child play and be creative and all that bakwas, yeah? No, we're Indians, bro. We're Chinese, we're Japanese. That's the sunnah. It's packing all that bakwas yani, in. These kids are flipping sponges. And Quran, 100%. Kids have the capacity, languages. So forget all that liberal play and shut up. There's plenty of time for that. Plenty of time for that. These ages right now to get this stuff in, regardless whether they understand it, say it properly or not, it is going to stick. And then later on, then when they're doing it, when they want to do it, it will just become easy. They'll thank you for it. You won't get the thanks now, but they'll thank you for it one day.
Someone else is asking, our sister Sanan, she's saying, you mentioned your story and that it's kind of unique in the sense you're saying, but like, many of our sisters, many women who are primarily at home and probably have, more time, maybe some of them have like a lot of time also. Could they kind of adapt to your system,
Nah, nah,
and
nah,
use that
nah,
in
nah,
certain way?
nah, 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 nah. You see, the key that I was speaking about was not about just being alone and not working. That would be, of course, you can adapt that in your own way. And you have to, obviously, because what else are you going to do? What was what was the alone for me was alone in the house of Allah. That's a whole different thing, yani, versus yani
Yeah.
being in your bedroom. It's still your bedroom. When we do homeschooling, when we speak about this and protect this house, how important do we make the point that when you're teaching your child, you've got to park away that you're the mom and dad. You've got to make a separation. How many times do we say that the room cannot be the bedroom or the kitchen, or it's got to be a room? There's got to, how many times do we say in homeschooling the importance of another teacher? Another teacher. So it's not just the fact that you're the most qualified one to do that, you've got all the qualifications to do the homeschooling, but these changes of environment are fundamental educational points, they're touch points that have an impact. So I just want to make it clear that no, unfortunately, I don't think a person at home is able to recreate the buzz of I'm actually here. I remember this buzz that I'm going to be at uni. I'm not. I'm being marked in. I'm not there. I'm getting paid for this. What a buzz. I'm walking around the masjid. I'm enjoying myself. And this is the greatest time of my life. I'm not married. I've got no kids, got no responsibility. It was a different vibe. You're
Mm.
at home, you got a husband to stress about, kids gonna come home soon, house has got to be clean, food's got to be ready. It's a jihad for the folks today and people who are married today. And we used to say when we were young, man, that people used to believe that the statement of Umar of learn before you lead, this idea that you're meant to actually, um, and the majority of scholars, in fairness, so the people are not to blame. They understood this as a person can't be an Islamic leader, yani, unless he's got Islamic qualifications. Our teachers interpreted this statement as the parents have to memorize their Quran before they become parents and before they get married. Because the leading only starts when you lead your wife. Before then, you're a leader of nothing. You're actually a slave in your home, you're a child. It's when you get married that's the first taste of authority. You are now in charge of your wife, then the children that come. And so, therefore, the idea was that you have to memorize and do your Islamic learning before you get married, before you get married. Because even the woman, even though she's subservient to the husband and he is in authority over her, she's still a leader of the house and she's still a leader of her children. So she has to get that done beforehand. That's not to say you can't be done afterwards. Of course, the whole point of this series is that you can be done, but don't compare the two, yani. Otherwise a person will get despondent when they realize where's the magic? It's not happening. No, because it's not the same.
Okay. Okay. Last question. I think there are some more questions, but just so that we're going to bring it to a close. The last question is regarding like as someone gets older, um, so like maybe the question like for you is like now what do you do in terms of keeping your Quran and so as you get older and you find that already there was that you probably didn't memorize it in the most ideal way, so now you're still trying to go over it and memorize it. Like, is there anything that you're doing particularly or anything that you would advise people to do? Because I think that's a big struggle that people are memorizing Quran, and then the biggest issue now is that revision element. Right, we're going to forget it, or I forget after 2 weeks. So a big push on this program also is to give people a system of revision. But I think that's a major like pain point for people that we're memorizing and we're forgetting. Memorizing is that constant like struggle.
This is why we have Sheikh Ahsan. This is why we have Hifz Pro. This is why we have Go Memorize. Because you're asking the wrong guy. Because I can tell you, I'm amongst those masses, yani, who also sit there trying to work out where and how could I find the time to do and yani this muraja. My muraja now is listening to Sheikh Abdul Rashid Al Sufi as much as possible. That's yani the extent, and it's not good enough, but it's what I enjoy and it's what I'm able to do from a time point of view. One of the things that subhanallah, um, when I go to Pakistan, which I increasingly do, right? That is my actual answer to your question. So I go to Pakistan with surahs in mind. So when I plan my trip to Pakistan, it's like I'm going to Pakistan to do Surah Safat and Surah Maryam. Because what I know is that nobody's going to get in my way, nobody's going to interrupt me, nobody knows me, and people know that I'm abroad. And so I would normally clear my calendar, no one's calling, I've taken time off work. And so in the morning, I go and recreate what I used to do when I was 20 years old. And I go to my dad's masjid and I walk around and I get Maryam on lock and I get Rahman on lock and I whatever. And so each trip for me to Pakistan is that muraja'a thing. And again, this is not something I advise, but that's just what I'm doing. And this is the perpetual struggle. This is the perpetual struggle. Um, but alhamdulillah that yani, you guys are doing what you're doing. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts more tawfiq into it. So many different apps now. So, you know what it is? Listen, there's never going to be a better time to find easier ways to do it. Yani, and the systems that are set up is crazy. Yeah, now the apps you can recite into it, and if you make a mistake, it's telling you do it again or what. It's a madness, actually. It's a madness. But you got to do it, though, isn't it? Still,
Mhm.
still got to put the time in. Still got to put the time in.
Any final words? Any final advice before we call it a night?
Oh, wallahi, to be honest, I just want to say that listen, to memorize the Quran is just it's just beautiful. And it's so empowering. And the iman boost of having Quran in your heart when things are down, there's nothing like it. There's there's not a thing on this planet. Yani, even as someone who went through the process right now, if I had £1 million, I would pay that £1 million to be able to not hesitate at any ayah and I could recite. In a heartbeat, I'd pay £1 million because I have tasted how much peace and how much maza there is from just reciting. And so I want to say that whatever difficulty or whatever you're thinking that it's not worth it or whatever it is, if you have the ability, it is. If you're not yani, trying to be a scholar or trying to be a day or it's too late for that behavior, then at the very least become a memorizer of the Quran. At the very least, there's a lot of people that want to read this and speak about that and lecture this. Yeah, we don't need more lecturers and da'is and dawah boys, dawah kids, dawah men, dawah bagwas, yani YouTube, yani podcasters. We don't. What we need, and we don't need more reciters for YouTube and TikTok and all these singers. We don't need any of that as well. What we need is people who are in love with the Quran because these people, they have very, very strong positive vibes. There's a barakah that flows from Ahlul Quran, which is crazy. It's keeping the world in balance and it's keeping this nation from being punished. They are the people who are yastaghfirun. They are the ones يعني, that وما كان الله معذبهم يعني, they are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to punish because وهم يستغفرون. They are the ones يعني, that are really locked in. They are able to put everything into context and perspective. Every moment in life يعني, goes back to what they've memorized. And of course, I don't want to say that memorization is everything. Obviously, I teach yani, the tadabbur of the Quran, meaning that's my real passion. I really, really like that. But my goodness gracious, if the tilawah and the hifz is with that, then you've smashed it. فوفقك الله يا شيخ أحسن. أكرمك الله وبارك فيك.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. I appreciate your time. Jazakallah khair, especially since you weren't feeling too well. I really appreciate that you gave us this time this evening. May Allah Azza wa Jal bless you. May Allah Azza wa Jal keep you
آمين
safe.
وأنت
May Allah Azza wa Jal
كذلك
put barakah in your
جميعا.
and in your da'wah and in your family. And hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, we'll hopefully see you again sometime soon on a future program of some sort, inshallah.
بارك الله فيك جميعا بارك الله
Jazakallah
فيك
khair,
حبيبي
barakallah feek. And I also want to thank
أكرمك الله.
everyone else for their questions and for attending. And inshallah ta'ala, our next webinar will be on Saturday, where we're going to speak about, we've spoken about the different ways of doing hifth and revision. We're going to speak about the toppings, if you like, the finishing adjustments and certain things that a person can do when, sometimes things don't go to plan, how you can deal with those curveballs, inshallah, in your hifth journey. So that will be inshallah on Saturday. But Jazakallah khair, everyone, for attending. Barakallah feekum. And we'll leave it there. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.